So the first thing to do is to welcome all of you who are here in the Town Hall Theatre for this talk about the power of theatre with two exceptional theatre makers. You're all very welcome, but we also want to welcome the people who are watching this live streamed on Facebook at the moment as well. If you're watching on Facebook, there will be an opportunity for you as well as for our audience here to ask questions later on. Before we get started with our conversation, I do have to just point out the fire escapes. So there's the door through which you came if you're on the ground level here. There's a door at the back. And for those of you who are up there in the balcony, it's again the door through which you came. And yeah, there will be sparks in the conversation, I'm sure, but hopefully no fire in the auditorium. Ba-dum-ching. Anyway, yeah. So anyway, you are all very welcome. My name is Patrick Lonergan. I'm Professor of Drama at NUI Galway here in the city. I'll be moderating the discussion, but of course we're mostly going to be hearing from Emma Rice, who is currently Artistic Director of the Globe, formerly Artistic Director of Kneehigh, and who we discovered last week has got a wonderful new company called Wild Children.
Wise,
yeah, there you go, typo.
Wise and Wise.
Which is a brilliant name.
Thank you.
We'll talk more about that in due course. Also then we have Noeline Kavanagh, who's the Artistic Director of Macnas, the Galway-based but world-dominant street performance and spectacle company as well. So we're going to talk about a lot of things. This talk is about the power of theatre. We want to talk about making theatre, the place of theatre, and the power of theatre in all sorts of different ways. But where I wanted to start actually is with a word that we don't necessarily often hear in relation to theatre, and that word is love. And the reason for that, Emma, I was reading in the introduction to the script of Tristan and Yseult, which is what is on the stage right here. You use the word love to talk about this play an awful lot. Not love in the kind of Hollywood sense, the commercialized sense, but something more authentic, more real. And I'm also very aware that in your season in the Globe Theatre, you're calling that season the Summer of Love for the Globe as well. So, you know, we talk a lot, people in business use the word passion, people in theatre use the word passion, but we don't often hear people use the word love. It seems like a really good word to use, though, especially for your work. Is that true?
I've never thought about it before. I think it's such a primal human state and human desire. So I think a lot of plays are about love. A lot of the stories that we tell are about either the pursuit of love, the loss of love, the celebration of love, although less about the celebration. I think we like to be heartbroken. So I think we quite often imagine ourselves without love or seeking love rather than being in it. But my life has been filled with love. And I do love theatre, and I do love the people that I make theatre with. And largely, that's sort of such an extreme blessing. It's often a curse because you can get into terrible trouble and then you have to get out of trouble, which is really what Tristan and Yseult is absolutely about that. And one of the things I love about, I'm using the word again, I love about Tristan and Yseult is it's very non-judgmental. This ancient text looks at people being unfaithful, falling in love with the wrong person, but they're not bad people. You watch them try and navigate their way through what it is to be a human being, and I love that non-judgment around this most precious and powerful of motors in our lives.
Can you take us through the process maybe? I mean, this is a play that you're returning to, that you started work on in the early 2000s, staging it in Cornwall with Kneehigh. Took it on tour and now reviving it again. So when you started with the play, there was a company that was working on it. Can you tell us a little bit about how something like this gets put together?
Well, I feel quite nostalgic talking about Tristan and Yseult because it feels like a different world now. So Kneehigh was a company, but a small company. We didn't have much money, and we primarily toured and worked in Cornwall. And I actually inherited this project from Bill Mitchell, who's the designer of this amazing set. And I didn't want it. I couldn't get my head round Tristan and Yseult. I didn't like the medieval. I'm not a girl who likes Game of Thrones, so I could not get my head round the dragons and the knights in shining armour and the lepers and the dwarves. You know, it's riddled with oddness that I couldn't get my head round. So in answer to your question, we had 4 weeks rehearsal, and then we did a short run in Restormal Castle in the open air. And we all, in those days, we just said, shall we make a show? And almost nothing was prepared before we started, including the writing. So the writers were in the room at the same time. So I would be tasking the writers to write the text, the musicians to write the songs, the actors to start creating the scenes. So incredibly higgledy-piggledy, and it's gone down in knee-high folklore, but it's true, which is I'd had a terrible idea for the production, which wasted an entire week before I had a good idea for the production. So we actually made it in 3 weeks.
So you had nothing, and 3 weeks later you had Tristan and Yseult.
Oh, I had a really bad production after 1 week.
Yeah.
and then I started again, and then and what we saw on the stage after that 4 weeks, you would recognise very, very strongly to what you would see tonight or in Galway. It's expanded, and it's the depth of the production has grown with every time that we've made it, and with all the humanity that's been poured into it. But the bones of it are the same, and I find that extraordinary. Is that the work has definitely improved and deepened, but something amazing happened with the chemistry of that time, those people. The freewheelingness, I didn't think anybody would ever see this show. It was in a castle in Cornwall. There was no pressure on it, and something magic happened.
And you acted in that production, did you?
Yeah, I did. That was another mistake, which is I worked out very late on that a character called Yseult Whitehands was very interesting to me, and I hadn't cast anybody in the part. So I thought, well, I was the only woman in the room at the time, so I thought I better do it. And I used to note the show. I used to have a notebook and note all the way through, and you'll notice that the actors still have notebooks. Whitehands doesn't, but of course, because she's the storyteller, it worked very, very well. So I would just tell bits of the story and then go, no, that's all wrong. And it worked very well. I was always being able to watch as well, so that's why she's always present.
And then coming back to it then, was that, how did it feel to go back to it? Is it like...
This time?
Yeah. Is that like sitting into a comfortable chair in a family home, or how does that...
No, it's much more complicated than that. I dread it. Going back, returning to work is quite a painful process. It's not a painful process, it's a painful thought, because you remember what was precious about it and what was unique about it, and the terror that show might be diluted in some way or damaged in some way is a painful thought. And it's also painful, which I bet you recognise, to go through the process again, because this piece particularly is very raw and very personal, so you have to revisit a time in your life and try and reimagine what the truth of it was, and then pour in the new truths. So I'm dragged kicking and screaming to remake shows.
You're nodding there, Noeline, I notice, in recognition.
Well, I totally am. Like, I just hearing somebody else speak about it is actually quite comforting, because you realise that it's a very unique process, but it's a universal one. Like, I think no matter what, taking a theme of love, which is in the work that we make love on an epic scale, and we share it with 55,000 people, which is a big boom of love going into the space. But it's I think the theme has many edges to it, and I think you're right. And I think that that's what makes it constantly interesting, because either you're approaching love as a catalyst for change, you're approaching love as a learning tool, you're approaching love as grief, you're approaching love as anger, you're approaching love as fear, you're approaching love as vulnerability, and these are all epic scenarios, but they're all very much the axis on which the human condition is built upon. So it never tires me, but it often frightens me.
But absolutely, because I think that sense of fear that you describe as well, the fear of the play is opening in 4 weeks and we don't have anything yet. I'm sure you recognise that as well.
It.
Yeah.
Do you know?
I quite like it. You see, I'm at my most relaxed making work.
For you.
Yeah.
As the pressure builds, I get... but I love that state, that free state.
Yeah.
And I have to just finish what I said earlier, which is the reality of making a show is beautiful. It's the thought of it that isn't. Because actually what happens is new people come and reinterpret and refine and help me to reimagine the work. So it becomes a very fulfilling project. It's just the thought of it is.
So a lot of this is dependent on the people that you work with.
Yeah.
And this is a question that certainly in Ireland we grapple with a lot, is about the idea of the ensemble, the group of people who you work with over and over again, or if you're hiring in a new cast for every show or whatever it might be. So presumably in order to have that safety net where you're going into a rehearsal room and you say, well, we don't have a script yet, we don't have music, we have actors, but we don't know who they're playing. You must be able to trust the people who are in the room with you in order for that to happen. Is that the case? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you get to a point of having a group of people around you like that? How do you build that kind of ensemble?
I think there's two answers to that question, which is that I don't really make work like that anymore because I think the world's changed, but certainly life changes, and Kneehigh changes, and we change as we get older. I think with hindsight, I mean, Kneehigh was fairly extraordinary, although there are companies all around the country that are trying to do the same thing, in that we weren't really on a career ladder. We just chose to be in Cornwall making work with each other. And therefore, the ensemble fed itself. We kept coming back. And it's funny because now, you know, with equal opportunities and diversification and accessibility, which I believe passionately in, you know, we were none of those things. We were a group of people that just came back to each other, kept finding new ways to reinvent each other. Because that's the thing, is you keep working with the same people, you have to find something new. It's why I've always got crazy casting, because you can't cast to type in an ensemble. You have to keep saying what's new, what's surprising. But we're not only a theatre company, we're friends, whether I'm at Kneehigh or not. You know, we've seen each other get married, have babies, get divorced. We're burying our parents now. You know, it's a real thing, and that's really precious and quite rare as well.
Who do you collaborate with, Noeline?
I'm really lucky. I have an amazing tribe, again, that kind of didn't form by design, but somehow formed out of necessity. And I don't know quite really how those Macnas work, but that's what happened. I think that I have a group of guardians of the unpredictable that found their way to this disused pram factory at the edge of a lane. And some of them are in this audience, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful. Like, it's a huge privilege to work with people who want to follow you through tunnels of inventiveness, dementedness, chaos making, at times despair, and then emerge out the other side of it with something to show for it that is collective and beautiful. So I think my situation's a little bit different, because when I talk about Macnas, I suppose I inherited a company that had already been in existence. So Macnas is 31 years old. So I became I call myself the artistic landlady of Macnas, like in Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City. Mrs. Madrigal without the necessary hash browns, maybe, you know, some interesting cooking. But I suppose I came in and there had already been a huge legacy of a certain kind of performance and a certain tribe had established. And like any interesting and fabulous company that manages to survive over 31 years, it's kind of like what I would call a dysfunctional family at Christmas Day. You know, there have been marriages, divorces, splits, you know, departures, arrivals. And I think I arrived at the company at a really interesting time where it was on an axis of change anyway. So when I arrived in, I think Macnas was on the cusp of either resuscitating or not rising again. And I don't know what the gods had planned, but basically we resuscitated. And as a result of that, a kind of a whole new ensemble of artists and engineer of imagination emerged. And with that, you talk about the necessity of evolving and energizing an ensemble and keeping it alive. And I think when you say, where did I get that ensemble from? It's that's what we now have. And it's in my working life, it's the first time that I've had the privilege of working with an ensemble, because I would have usually worked as a freelance artist in solo projects. And I think that work has benefited the company and me and how we relate to each other hugely. And there's a whole new generation emerging. As you say, you've got to keep it surreal and real, you know, mad and bad. And
We always talk about catalysts, that you need to knock yourself off balance.
All the time, tipping points, and make change when people don't want you to make change. And
I inherited Kneehigh as well.
Did you? Oh,
yeah, Mike Shepherd started Kneehigh, who's King Mark. So it's a similar thing, inheriting and building and
building and changing and shifting with that.
I know, and there's a thing there where, you know, you have to be loyal to what's gone before, and you recognise that a company doesn't last that long without people, you know, doing things. Yeah. But then you also know that you've been put there to do a job yourself.
Yeah, you have to evolve it.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, you talk about love. That comes back to love, you know, and there's fear and bravery in evolving and changing. And it's anybody that says they like change, they're lying. They're liars. Because change is, I'm not allowed to curse, change is very difficult. Yeah. But it's very necessary. But it's like a constant rebirth, you know, and it's necessary, but it's difficult. But the results of it are, like love, worth pursuing, I think.
So, I mean, the companies you've worked with, that kind of thing about change has been important too. You're about to begin a company more or less from scratch, is that a fair way to put it?
Totally from scratch.
Yeah, so that's, talk a bit about that experience then of inventing.
Well, I've had a pretty remarkable year, which landed me in a position where I had a clean slate in front of me, which has never happened. It never happens. You always have plans and commitments, and I found myself at the edge of a cliff and thought, this is a rare moment, and I have to be really careful.
So just maybe for those who don't know, you were in Shakespeare's Globe,
yes,
and you made a determination that you were going to finish your contract in April 2018 or something like that. Yeah,
correct.
And so you then had this space in which to do things that were new.
Yes, and it was all a little bit of a surprise. So it was a surprise clean slate, and it was with quite. I'll move on through that. But what was really interesting, and I so much of my work has been about fairy tales, is I did feel this is the moment, and it's rare that you wake up and you go, I'm not the child, I'm the adult, and I have power, and do I use it for good? And do I use it for pleasure, and do I use it for the greater good or for the personal good? And the answer was very simple, because I'm a company girl, always have been. I stay put, I love communities, and I love my friends. So it was never really a question about what I would do. I knew I wanted to start a company, and I knew what I wanted to call it, which is Wise Children, which is really about this middle moment, which is holding on to your innocence, but also accepting your power at a certain moment.
Fantastic. I mean, you talk there about community, and I think this again is something that's very important for both of your work, in fact. And so, I mean, one of the things we've been thinking about a lot in Galway as we head towards being Capital of Culture in 2020 is the importance of place. So a lot of the time when people, certainly when I first came here 12 years ago, when people spoke about Galway in cultural terms, they spoke of it as being peripheral or parochial even, sometimes. Whereas I think since that time, and even before that time, people instead saw it as being actually on the edge of things, and they used that sense of being on the edge as a powerful way of actually making work that isn't dominated by what's trendy in the metropolis.
The big smoke.
Yeah. So that thing of, I guess, being on the edge and then going into the centre, going into the London or the Broadway or wherever, I think can be hugely enabling. I mean, would that be true for Macnas?
Yeah, I definitely think that we're outsiders. I think it suits us best. We don't try to be outsiders. You don't consciously go, I want to be outside having no crack the whole time. But then what you do is you find when you're outside, you create your own crack. So I always use the school disco as a metaphor. I used to go to the old school discos, and it was a disaster. Nobody would ask me to dance. And I'd say, I'm never going to get kissed. It's never going to happen. I'm going to be like 80 and nobody will have ever kissed me. And then I decided I'll have my own school discos. So that's what I did, and then I kissed loads of people, and it was great. So I learned from quite an early age that, like, being on the outside has its benefits. Yeah. And I think that with Galway, definitely, I think a lot of people choose to live here for that reason. I also think as well that as artists and creators, wherever you are in the world, that you are inspired, influenced, or somehow impacted by the landscape you work in. Like, my choice is to make work in the public realm. Like, I am absolutely obsessed with disrupting civic life Like, it's what I love to do. And like, if I could make every city a playground of imagination and engage city councils in reimagining how cities are structured, so for the betterment of the wise children within us all, I would, that's the pursuit of happiness for me, engaging with unlikely heroes. Like, when we make our work, we have to engage with. We did a gig last year in Austin, Texas, in South by Southwest, and it was on 6th Street, and it was this kind of unlikely festival. But again, we had to find 250 people from the local city. But also there was a lot of homeless people on the street, and that's their home. So like, I went around and I asked them, do you mind if we take over your GIAF for a while? And do you want to get involved? And what's your place? And how do you want to do that? And we had to engage with, you talk about that sense of community. We had to engage with the police, and the gun-toting Texan police. And that was amazing to see these men walking in front of giant elephants and a 15-foot high 8-year-old boy, and they were like, ma'am, there's a rhinoceros in a wheelchair coming around the corner. Is that meant to be happening right now, ma'am? And you're like, absolutely, officer. Yes, it is. And I suppose like that's always on the edge of things. We were on the edge of what is a very amazing festival, but quite trendy-wendy, and so it was quite unusual to have these chaos makers come in, overtake a city full of tech heads and innovators and business women and men, populated with giants and imagination for an hour and a half, and then disappear again. So there's a lovely outsider waltz that happens, I think, in those scenarios, and there's a loveliness in coming back to the Atlantic Ocean, back to our fabulous disused pram shed on the grounds of NUIG in Galway, and just feeling like, great, we're home, and here's our audience, and here's our life.
And there's something lovely that's happening with Kneehigh, which is that you've got a show that was made in Cornwall and set there, but also deals with Ireland, and you're bringing it here as well. So, I mean, place must be incredibly important for your work as well.
Absolutely, and for Kneehigh, we've got a set of barns on the south coast of Cornwall, and I think it's a radical choice. You don't even know you're making it, but to choose not to be getting up to London all the time, it's impossible to. We've just got mobile phone signal, but we've never had it, which means you have to talk. There isn't a cafe to go to, so we do eat together. You end up drinking together, you party together, you make each other laugh. So the intimacy is built in a way that it just doesn't happen in London. It just doesn't, because everybody's always trying to do their 2-hour commute, or see a show, or meet an agent, or get a film. There's a variety of things that happen that just don't happen. They're not options in Cornwall. And I think that the early history of Kneehigh and all the work that's been made at the barns, you can smell the salt on it because that's what it was, not because it's romantic, it's the truth of it. Yeah. And this tour's magic. I know Mike really wanted it to do the Celtic nations because it's a Celtic story. And so it's brilliant for it to end in Ireland. Brilliant.
Does that give you a kind of freedom, though, as well, with the stories that you tell? Because I mean, in the work of yours that I've seen, I saw The Wild Bride a number of years ago, and this is a play that starts off as being a grim fairy tale, and then it's a kind of Southern American Gothic blues story. And so it seems like every rule, every expectation breaks down as something else happens, and you're never quite sure where you are. And that's kind of wonderful because there's a freedom from rules, there's a freedom from expectation. Is that a fair characterisation of how you...
I mean, I'm only just working out that there was a rule book, but it's a bit late. I never read it. I didn't know what it was. So, I mean, I think my personal... But, in the end, you are the sum of your parts, and I've got an eccentric sum of parts. I went to drama school, but then I ended up in Poland working with Garjanicza in the early 90s. And I told a lot of... I did a lot of touring of primary schools, telling stories, and that really informed all of my practice, because a room of 7-year-olds are the best audience for telling you when you're boring. And they're the best audiences for telling you how to structure a narrative, because they just start talking about their cat if they're bored.
They're bored.
Or my favourite one, because when I was a performer, I can remember singing a very loud song, and I had my eyes closed and I was singing up to the heavens. I was being a silky woman at the moment. I think I was about to dive back into the ocean, and I turned around and the whole school had their fingers in their ears. So they're very good for telling you either you can't sing or don't sing so loud. So it's a really good, and I think there is a freedom in the work, because I always think if it feels right, then it's right. And also, I wouldn't make anything if I started worrying about what you could and couldn't do. I wouldn't do anything.
Well, I wanted to ask you, you said that a minute ago, there is a rule book. Is there a rule book?
There's
Yeah.
something at the back of the class.
So where is the rule book? I know there's a rule book about things like Shakespeare, for example, where, there's a set of expectations about you should do.
Don't you start twinkling at me because
Yeah.
you said the Shakespeare word.
I'm not, but just that's one example that people,
I think, seriously, I think that a lot of theatre is text-based.
Yeah.
And that history is fantastic, is precious, is not only well documented, but is studied. So there's a great in-depth knowledge about it. And if you're not doing that work, I think it can be, yes, there's less knowledge. It can feel more controversial.
But I think isn't there also a thing though where, the fact that theatre has survived for the thousands of years that it has is because there were constantly people saying, I'm not going to follow that rule book,
Yeah, but I think as well, I was just thinking about the first kind of medieval plays and, the clowns and the performers that rolled up into villages and town squares. That's where the tradition started. So there's me banging on about me public realm again. But that is the origin of storytelling in whatever way that you want to, whatever medium you choose to express it in. So I suppose I would align myself alongside Emma in the sense that I have a real passion about the physical act of storytelling, how story comes into the body and how it's translated into the visual, as well as the use of text alongside that. So with the rule book for spectacle or for work that happens in unconventional theatre spaces, there is none. But there are conventions, or you have to consider your fabulous audience and your performers. But beyond that, what makes it really exciting is that you've got the opportunity to draw on that tradition, but to evolve it, change it, usurp it.
Absolutely.
And that's what's really exciting, and to keep that energy going. And it is great to have reference books, but what is it? Rules are for fools, B.A. Baracus from the 18th. So, my friend Judith and I always used to talk about there was double yellow lines in school, and when we were 4, you were told you cannot go over the double yellow lines. And I was like, what happens if we do? What will happen? Will the world stop? And we, ran over the double yellow lines and we found blackberries. Yum, smere a dova, delighted with our lives, And so I'm just saying that, rules are there for a reason, but also, as artists and as creators and as human beings, it's our job to question them, evolve them, change them, and write new ones.
I agree entirely, and I also think, more and more, I think, there's often your work is looked at as if there's choice involved, and there's not a lot of choice. There's what I am and what I feel and what I see and what the people in the room see. So the judgment is really fairly immaterial. It doesn't change what I am or what I see. It just changes how it's perceived. But as you mature and change, it's really important to keep the noise out and keep saying what makes me smile, what makes me cry, what makes me furious. You have to keep going back to the simplicity of compulsion. I often think I do things because I'm compelled, not because I choose.
But is an audience a really important part of that as well, though? That it's the experience. No,
I don't think about the audience too much. Obviously, when you're here, I do. But then I think every show starts with me, and then I feel I feel like I'm a detective. I feel like I think, well, why do I want to tell that story? Why is that story? Now, that it might be The Wild Bride, or it might be Steptoe and Son, or it might be Brief Encounter. Why am I thinking about that? And then, so I work out what my personal compulsion is at that particular time in my life. And then you start sharing that with your actors, and then they add, it's when you get what I call the collective imagination, because then they start, things that I never thought of start bubbling around, all around the same, the integrity of the idea is still there. And then your creatives, your teams, your writers and your musicians add in, and then the audience are the final piece. But at that point, you're a sort of invincible army that are so filled with truth and knowledge and determination that you can't believe that they won't love what you've made. If audiences don't, then it's devastating. But at that moment, you just have to keep saying we're all the same. That's what I feel.
But I think the key word that you've used there, which has just totally lit me up, is the integrity. It's about the truth of it, isn't it? And it's like, that's why you do it. It's you're compelled. It's a truth within you, and then it's the gossamer's thread of how you start to kind of unravel that spool, and who you bring into the room, and then what you weave. But integrity, I think, is at the heart of it.
And if you started thinking what might an audience want, I don't think you could get up in the morning.
No, you wouldn't get out of bed.
Because everybody wants something different. You can't, it would drive you insane.
The fear would just be like, no!
Is there a thing though about, I mean, earlier, we talked about these stories that you tell, and Tristan and Yseult, The Red Shoes, The Grim Fairy Tales, a lot of your own work. These are stories that are out there, and they kind of belong to everybody, don't they? So the work that you're doing is taking those stories and giving them back to people with a number of twists along the way. So is that an important part of it, the thing about, for want of a better word, accessibility, that the work that both of you make is work that anyone can see, anyone can engage with? Is that, again, a fair characterization?
Well, I have to think about that now for a minute. I keep going back over the same themes, and I don't know whether that's something you should say out loud in a room full of people. As somebody who creates work, I'm obsessed with love, hurt, fear, and transformation. So I excavate we've used this word before when we were talking earlier, cul-de-sac of despair and open space of joy to kind of dig and find that work. But I feel that they're all familiar to everybody in this room. So like when you're making the work and you're consciously, there's the rule book of knowing that you're making work that an audience will see. So that's just a given. But I think that subconsciously that the themes that I've chosen over the years have been, again, from that place of what affects me and what my truth is, and then how you manifest that into being to see how an audience will respond and react and engage with that. And I think that when that moment happens, as you say, when you hope it happens, when the audience respond in a manner and means, well, then you know that we're all human and that we're all in this together. And I suppose a little bit for the work that we make, we do it in more less formal spaces. So what's kind of lovely about that is that people don't consciously decide. Sometimes the way they might come in to see a theatre show, that they'll buy a ticket and they'll go and they'll spend this time. They could happen upon our work or stumble upon it or reluctantly be brought to it. So I think that in itself introduces a whole other dynamic in relation to the way the stories are told or made. I don't know if that made sense. I don't know whether it answered your question.
Yep.
But sorry about that.
No.
Rambled a bit.
Yeah. Do you want to?
I think my work is accessible. That isn't a plan. I think I like to know what's happening. I think I can't bear not understanding something because I feel that I'm excluded from some club. So I think I constantly say, how can we reveal that to an audience? I feel that everybody from 7 to 107 ought to be able to understand. Now, that doesn't mean that it's dumbed down or that it doesn't have many layers of understanding that bubble through it, but that people can't say, I don't know what's happening, or who's that person, that you have to reveal. Otherwise, it feels a bit cruel. So I do try and be accessible in that way. But I tell the stories that I know. And you know what? The stories I know are the stories I was told as a child and the films I watched when I was off sick. Or pretending to be sick, So I think I return. I always call myself a storyteller primarily, and I return to the stories that bubble up. Yeah. I'm quite a believer that stories survive for good reasons, and that they bubble up when you need them. And then I try and tell them at that moment. I try and capture them. I call it the itch. That when I think, I'm thinking about Bluebeard. What's that about?
Brilliant.
Anyway.
We're going to go out for questions in a minute, so you can be thinking about questions you might want to ask. If you're watching us on Facebook and you'd like to ask a question, you can do so by writing a comment in the comment box below the screen. Yes, indeed. But before that, I just wanted to explore this issue of accessibility in one other way. So we think about accessibility. Part of it is you're in a theatre, you understand what's happening. Another part is that the ticket prices weren't ridiculously expensive, or that it was free, you know, as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
And out on the street.
Exactly. But another part of it as well is that you take theatre to places where it doesn't normally happen, where you take it on tour.
I love that.
Where it means you don't have to get on a train or a plane to London or to New York and pay, you know, £80 or $120 or whatever for a ticket. So touring has been really important, not only for Kneehigh, but for the company you're about to set up as well. Is that an important part of your work, to bring it to different places?
Yes, I think I've grown up touring, so I think I've got the nomad in me. And the only alternative is to be in one building, which is not really something that I want to do. I mean, I've loved the globe, but of course it doesn't have a roof. There's something you can always look up at the London sky. And I love the way that work has to reinvent itself. Every theatre that we come into. So, for example, I don't know how many of you have seen this show or will see it, but it usually has at the end this amazing effect with a white kabuki coming down, and we can't fit it in to Galway. So yesterday we went crazy and made 8 flags, and there's a whole new bit in the show, and I love that. And that isn't a stress for us. That's like brilliant. Well, how are we going to solve
Figured
the
it
fact?
out, exactly.
And that's because you're having to find a temporary community. And Galway's our temporary community with everything that it brings, whether it's physical or emotional.
But isn't that great? I mean, this is a show that's, 14 years old, something like that? And this is the end of a tour, and you're still...
Yes,
completely new scene in it. Yeah.
That is brilliant, yeah.
One of the most exciting bits of news I have around that is I've managed to get a lamppost and a bin removed from a street so that our work can go down it. And that's the first time that's ever happened in 31 years. Because the route that we've chosen is the route where everybody will have the best experience. So I was talking to Dublin City Council and I was told, it's never going to happen. It's going to cost 15 grand to move that lamppost. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is progress. Like, they're going to get rid of the lamppost and they're getting rid of the bin. So those things, when we go on tour, they are massive.
Yeah. But I mean, you like, if you think of the locations you've toured to in the last number of months, or years, in fact, you've got certainly the United States, but you've been to...
We've been to China, Australia, Russia, Lithuania, and the UK in the last 8 years. And it's always fascinating because it's that lovely, again, I go back to that lovely waltz of the unpredictable, which really infuses the work with great excitement. Because you have to find these unlikely partners everywhere you go. And exactly what Emma said about the white flags, you've got to keep on finding those inventive ways to go, well, this giant isn't going to fit down this street, so can we just move the buildings, or can we just reimagine how we can engage with each other and make this happen? And that's that lovely communion, where you get this group of people that just want to make it happen.
I think we have time for maybe a couple of questions. If anybody would like to quite a few people. I can see, I can see 2 people there. So, and if we have questions online as well, we'll get to those in a minute. I can see, I think, Alice there, and then there's a person in front of you. So we'll, and I'll just remind you as well, you are on Facebook, so not that you would do such a thing, but no cursing, yes. Okay, so I'll just repeat that for those who are watching online or those who didn't hear it maybe. The question is about theatre makers who've had an influence on your work. Is that, okay, great. Emma, do you want to take
Well, I'd have to say Complicité. I first saw them when I was a student and they were an ensemble. I'd never seen anybody like them physically on stage. They were being funny, they were obviously improvising, so that was a big love. I'd have to say Garganicha because it was such a formative time. And they taught me to work metaphorically and with the voice and the body. They sort of transformed me and the way that I see theatre making.
And I think, Noeline, you'd probably, one of the people you'd say was Emma Rice, actually, is it?
Yeah. I'd have to say the bridie here to me left has been a huge influence on my work. Didn't want to be too much of a sycophant when we met, but now I can absolutely. I saw a number of Emma's shows. not back in the day, relatively recently, but also when I was forming my own decisions about my working life. Ariane Manunchk is another huge influence on my work personally. Théâtre du Soleil in Paris. She's a ledge bag of perpetual brilliance, another brilliant person. And I have to say, John Fox from Welfare State International kind of changed how I thought about the world, really, in my practice, saying that, like, you can't just be a director, you've got to learn the melodeon and learn how to teach and cook and dance and laugh and do all of those really important things. And I can't not say Els Comedians that came to Galway when I was a kid. And basically, my parents are witness to that event, and I hope don't regret it. So there you go.
Very good. There was a gentleman, I think, just in the middle here. Is that? Yeah.
I've been lucky enough to see some of your productions in the local ones. First, I've got a couple of very quick fire questions about the tour. The Taming of the Shrew production, set in Ireland. I don't know if bringing that one over to the west of Ireland. It seemed like it fit very well with the place that we have here. Cathy O described as your muse. Is she part of your new ensemble for wise children? And then I think I have a question. Seeing that production.
I'm going to recap these just for the audience, if that's okay. So.
Polio, I don't know, is there something in that bringing yellow stockings and cross garters to theatre? Is that sort of something?
Oh.
So we're going to. There's a bunch of questions there about the Globe, which are really interesting questions. People might be aware that the Taming of the Shrew was reset to Ireland. Aoife Duffin played the lead role at the Globe, and it was a way for this theatre that we associate with Shakespeare and with Britain to actually think about the centenary of the Easter Rising, which is kind of amazing, and to use Shakespeare as a way of doing that. So the question is about whether we'll ever see that here. I think the answer is probably no, isn't it?
Probably no,
Yeah.
yes. I don't think the Globe will be doing it, but that doesn't mean there's not other avenues. I'd love it. It was a brilliant production, and it was. I made several key decisions at the Globe, which changed the way that work is made, and one of the key ones was to not have actors in rep, because that is the cheapest way of using actors. But the simple thing of saying no, every production can have its own team, although it's a little bit more expensive, means that you suddenly get very fresh voices, because when you have to share, everything becomes averaged out. So Caroline Byrne had a fully Irish company who smashed it and changed, who fizzed and partied and politicised and transformed not only the Globe, but that Shakespeare play. You felt such integrity as well. It was one of the proudest moments for me. I'd love it to have a future life for Caroline, but the Globe won't be. What was the other one?
Yeah, I might just recap some of it. So I guess that we can maybe take the question a bit more broadly, which is that in terms of maybe actors who you've worked with at the Globe who might go forward with you in your other company, is there anything you can say about...
There's nothing formal. I hope to be taking everybody that I love and have known with me. I don't mean all, not like in a Pied Piper sort of way, but I'm hoping the Wise Children will be a... I don't know whether I identify with Malvolio. Yes. She's my dearest friend, and I hope to work with her till we're 80 and beyond. And no, I don't identify with Malvolio because he wasn't a kind man. And but I love a yellow stocking. So.
Okay, we have some questions from people who are watching us on Facebook, so thank you to those of you who've done that. I'm going to race through these quickly. There are three that I particularly want us to consider. So the first is, do we ever see a possible collaboration between Macnas and Emma?
Jesus.
Yes.
Yes. Brilliant. Yeah.
If only there was like a capital of culture or something that would facilitate such a... Yeah. All right. This is more of a question, I think, for Paul Fahey than Emma, but will we see more of Kneehigh in Galway for future festivals?
Yay! Huzzah!
So Paul says hopefully. And very good. This maybe for both of you, and we might finish with this, is there a particular story that you would love to tell? That's from Tracy.
You go first, Emma.
Well, that would be telling, wouldn't it? E.T.
Oh, you got in before me.
Very good.
Geez, I'm just thinking. You know what, I'm obsessed with, funnily enough, Nick Cave. So maybe turning any number of his songs into a story with Tom Waits somehow writing it or something.
Yeah.
That's the story
together.
Somehow. Yeah, that's what I'd like to do.
Yes, it would be a cheerful kind of a thing.
Good happy. Huzzah!
Yes, but no doubt, yeah, wonderful as well. We do need to finish up because we have the small matter of a stage play to put on the stage in about half an hour. Before we do that, I mean, we have talked a little bit about your future plans. Could I ask each of you just maybe quickly to tell us what's up next for you?
Sure.
Yeah.
What's up next for us is we're conjuring up our next gigantic piece of work, which will be the Halloween parade in October, and then we're touring it to Dublin, and then we're closing the UK City of Culture with that particular event. And then this weekend we've got Julian Crouch, who's an amazing designer, and Helen Marriage and Marina Carr, who's a beautiful playwright, coming to meet the ensemble because we're getting ready to start the story of Gilgamesh, to tell it. Yes. So that's what we're at the moment.
So I've got quite a few productions ahead, but obviously I'm looking forward to Wise Children, and my first production will be an adaptation of Angela Carter's amazing novel Wise Children, which is really what it is to be on the wrong side of the tracks, to be on the illegitimate side of theatre and of London and of the class system and everything, and it feels like absolutely the right moment in my life, and Angela Carter needs celebrating as well.
Are you going to open that at the Old Vic and tour?
Yes.
Is that so it will be on the road, right? So whatever about maybe Kneehigh, we may well see work from Emma
Yes, please.
here in the future. Okay, that's a subtle hint to Paul. Just saying. Yeah. All right, I'm afraid that there's lots more we could talk about, but we do need to call things to a halt. So can I first of all thank all of you for coming here and for your great questions. Thanks also to everybody who's been watching us on Facebook and for your questions as well. But thanks in particular to our two wonderful speakers as well. So.